At the conclusion of our parsha, the Torah addresses the mitzvah of tzitzit. That if one has a four-cornered garment, one is obliged to put on its tassels, tzitzit. Either this is a garment worn under the clothing or over the clothing, such as the talit, the talis. And at the end of this section, the Torah says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And the Talmud says, what are these two things got to do with one another? Why does the Torah speak about tzitzit and then speak about leaving Egypt? There doesn't seem to be any connection between the two. And Rashi, citing our sages, says as follows. Hashem is saying to the Jewish people, don't forget that when you left Egypt, and on the night before you left, there was the plague of the killing of the firstborn. I, Hashem, had the ability to differentiate between a child who was a firstborn and who wasn't a firstborn. I didn't ask any questions. I have that knowledge. I made that distinction. And therefore, don't forget that I am able to tell the difference between a person who puts real techelet, that's the real blue dye, on their tzitzit, as opposed to one who puts on a blue dye that is fake. I can make that distinction. What does the Talmud mean by that? It seems to be that in the ancient world, there was a custom, an unfortunate custom, that there were people who were dishonest and would sell techelet. Techelet is a dye. One of the strings of the tzitzit had to be sky blue wool, and the dye was from a very expensive source. So there were people who would make a fake dye and sell it as if it was the real thing. And Hashem says, you know, you can fool people, but you can't fool me. Just as on the night prior to the Exodus, I made a distinction between those who were the firstborn and those who were not, I can see the difference between the real techelet dye and the dye that is fake. So don't think you can fool me. Don't be an imposter. And Rashi points out there are at least two other times in the Torah when this phrase appears. Another time is when the Torah discusses weights and measures. There's a very important mitzvah that if a person is a shopkeeper or he's dealing with merchandise, his weights and measures, his scales have to be completely honest and proper, and he has to deal with integrity. And again, the Torah says, because I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt. Again, the same teaching. I made the distinction between one who was a firstborn and one who was not a firstborn. And therefore, I can tell whether a person is dishonest with his scales, that they're adding a little bit less, that the calibration is not entirely correct. You can fool people, but you can't fool me. And then another time that the Torah speaks about this is in regards to lending money with interest. We have a mitzvah that we're not allowed to lend money to a fellow Jew with interest. But what some people would do to get around this problem is they would go to a non-Jew and they would give the non-Jew the money and then say to the non-Jew, please, you lend my money to this other Jew and you can charge him interest because you're a non-Jew. And in that way, we can make a little bit of a profit together. Again, the Torah says, I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt. I saw the difference between the firstborn and one who was not the firstborn. I can tell the difference between a person who is charging money with interest and somebody who is not charging money with interest and somebody who then goes and takes their money and gives it to a non-Jew so that they can work the scam together. You can fool people, but you can't fool me, says Hashem. Do not be an imposter. And this is something that is spoken about by our sages to a great extent, that one should not be a hypocrite. Not be a hypocrite. You can't give an impression out there in the public that I'm a righteous person, I'm a pious person, I'm an upright person, I'm a great person, but meanwhile, behind closed doors, you're involved in scams. And you think you're going to get away with it because people can't work it out. But you know what says Hashem? I can work it out. I know that this is a scam. I know that this is not correct. It's very interesting. The Talmud tells us that one of the Hasmonean kings, who was himself a tyrant, at the end of his life, when he was dying, he called his wife and those who were close to him, and he said, don't worry about this one, don't worry about that group, don't worry about this group. But the group that you really have to worry about is the hypocrites. Because the hypocrites going around behaving completely immorally and yet claiming a reward as if they are the most pious people possible. Those are the ones that we really have to worry about. And that's why the Torah tells us, I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt. I knew the difference between one who was a firstborn and one who wasn't. You can fool people, but you cannot fool me. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.